Hello, everyone. I am Ben Pick, and thank you for joining me in Running to Write, where I give questionable writing advice through running metaphors. And for those of you keen observers, you might notice something pretty cool behind me. I got a new bookshelf. It's a little bit narrower, but it's also a little bit brighter. So that's how you would kind of see it in how things and how the light reflects around a room. I also did some rearranging of the bookshelf behind me, and I actually have a very quickly expanding row of indie books, which is really cool. There are a lot of you out there with some incredible works, and yeah, I'll showcase as best I can. Also, yes, the lamp persists. It's something in the corner that detracts or whatever covers up the blank wall behind us. So I mean, I can remove it, but then I just had this like blank space right there, and there's an outlet there, so I try and cover it up with the lamp. So, lamp that's off, sitting on a speaker. Um, a little bit of decoration. I don't know. Maybe I can throw something else up there in that corner. I'm open to suggestions if you guys want to debate how I should arrange our room. Also, yes, I got a haircut. Not the biggest fan of it, but I think it'll grow out in about a week and look better then. The second thing that I wanted to point out is, although I guess it doesn't really apply to anybody here, but this coming weekend, there we go. Nope. There we go. This coming weekend is the Eat Local, Read Local event. That's at the Cascades Library, where I will be doing a book signing among 70 other authors. Hopefully, there's no rain. Otherwise, things will get shifted around. But assuming that there's perfect weather or that it's only a little bit cold out there, I will be at the Cascades Library from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. signing books, eating local food. So if you're in the area, this is a great chance to meet other indie authors and hang out at a library, which is always a cool place to be on a weekend. I'll stick with that. Now, yes, exactly, Richard. Food and books. You can't do any better. So thank you, Richard. Thank you, Adriana. And thank you, RC, for joining in on the comment section. And yes, I do absolutely hate haircuts. My hair curls in weird ways. So, like, no barber ever actually gets it right. And I've seen some really bad situations where they like try and cut my bangs, and one woman didn't actually look when she cut them, so like they came out slanted. I never went back to that hair cuttery, so yeah, there's that. Yes, sadly, my dog will not be allowed at the Cascades Library, so oh well. And he is in fact a good boy sometimes. But like I said, if you're in the area, please come and check out the Cascades Library and say hi, because it's always fun to hang out with people in real life. There we go. Moving on. Following up on my topic from 2 weeks ago, which was so last week, I had Lori Thorne on here to talk about Locally Love, her newest book that came out a week ago already on the 3rd. It's a holiday romance story. So if you enjoy comfy, sweet romance stories about the Christmas holiday, you should check it out. But before that, I was talking 2 weeks ago now. So I was talking about writing nonlinear stories. And one of the key tools for those is, as the story unfolds, to include a character's backstory. And that is the focus of tonight. So obviously, as the name of the episode implies, I'm going to be giving 5 tips to showing readers who our characters are or who they were to justify who they are once the story is underway. And I'm going to start off with number 1, a controversial tip, or don't. As much as we think readers need to know what a character has been through to understand them, maybe that is a bit overkill. Without getting into specifics or spilling too much tea, as I refuse to watch a recent series or read a couple of recent books that were universally panned as terrible, Well, multiple recent stories tell more backstory than actual story. When half to 90% of a story is about what it took to get the characters there, then the story is more being told so that there's no reason. The story is more about the character's trauma than any ongoing conflict. And these books and shows suffered for it. No, I'm not talking about Dune, although Richard, yes, we know that you do absolutely hate that. Um, yeah, I don't need to go into the specific shows and books. Well, I mean, I'll go into one of the books later on, so I'm just not going to name it. But spoil my next tip, and still speaking generally, the character's backstory didn't matter in those shows and books, as they were, well, sorry, specifically in the show, they were saved by a deus ex machina from a better story that we weren't told about. Or rather, a better story that fans know about, but wasn't actually included within that current story. That's why I can say it and toe a kind of line here. But worse is that those characters whose backstories we saw through episode after episode after episode, they had no impact on the story being told, which I think I just said anyways. Um, but there's a book that I'm reading which ruins its own pacing to travel back in time and give multiple character histories. The book feels like a slog because it lacks a lot in the way of plot. That issue is further exacerbated by cutaways to the past the moment the story starts getting interesting, or to shift to a different point of view just as things start happening to a character we care about in the story. Now, this is the first book in the series, and I would argue that we don't need to know that the villain is secretly possessed by an evil demigod until at least an epilogue, aha moment, or perhaps in a future novel in the series. We see that we see the demigod's backstory and multiple backstories for those forces of good who are there to defend humanity against them. It's a whole big thing. And sure, those are details. They're sometimes interesting. The book would have been better served holding those off until future novels. I started counting the number of backstory cutaways which trashed the author's pacing and the suspense of the moment. And it was even worse when those cutaways offered nothing in their page long descriptions. And no, Richard, I am not going to say what IP I'm talking about. It's an indie book that I'm going through, so I'm trying not to bash it too hard. Oh, sweet. So it looks like you did buy a cozy wishy book. Or sorry, you bought. I think you're talking. Yeah, I think you're talking about buying Lori Thorne's book, but you're saving it until after October to start reading. That's cool. Now, for that indie book that I'm reading, I would argue that it would have been better if most of that backstory was cut out, but then the book would be easily half as long. So it makes sense that it's in there for word padding, but to be a full size novel. But at the same time, it made the story painful to read. Now look at Wolverine. He was a better character before he became every trope. The too long didn't read high level summary is that he was born as Logan in I think the 1800s, might have been the 1700s, to a rich family, and they had either I think it was a greedy step or adopted family. Either way, somebody sought his family's money. Oddly enough, that's a very similar backstory to Charles Xavier and likely a dozen other characters within the X-Men. Now, from there, Logan fought in every war since the 1800s. So Civil War, sorry, every American war at least, and probably some other ones internationally. I don't really. This part of his backstory obviously is very fluid. So he fought in the Civil War. I think he might have technically fought in the Revolution in one of the iterations. I don't really know. I don't really care. Definitely the World Wars, both one and two. I think he was in Vietnam. There's a whole thing about it, which is really weird because He ends up being kidnapped by Department H, which is a Canadian-based government agency, where he was then codenamed Wolverine. And now there are so many implanted memories that not even the writers bother to distinguish between fact and fiction. Obviously, I'm using the term fact loosely here because this is all fiction stories, but it's a whole big mess. Logan is one of many X-Men characters whose backstory is very convoluted, kind of like the Summers family. But all that said, the less we knew about Wolverine's backstory, the better he was as a character. He was simply a man who was the best at what he did, and what he did was gut people like animals. Honestly, nothing in his backstory went to explain why he accumulates so many young women as little sisters who he then kind of guides and teaches about the world. But in trying to explain an impossible man, the writers mostly fail to tell a cohesive story. And I believe that they made a mistake over the years by trying to shove too much into what makes Wolverine Wolverine. He was a fan favorite for so many years, and people were craving stories about him. But once the writers started fleshing out who he was, it, in most cases, led to disappointment when it was less than what, well, we expected. But we, because this, came out in the 80s, I obviously wasn't really reading comics then. So we is kind of delayed, but we as in fans. And I'm not even going to touch on the whole lupine evolution in parallel to the ape storyline because at this point, I think that's been written out of continuity. Now, my second tip is to think about why. We need to answer that question. Why are we including a character's backstory? We're the sum of our parts, or in this case, the sum of our past. And I, for one, am shaped by every moment in my life before now. I share a lot here, but there's a lot I don't talk about because it's not relevant or because it makes me seem like a complete asshole. And yes, I pick up, well, when I walk my dog, I go around with a 5-gallon bucket of trash, and I do absolutely give condescending glares to people I see smoking because I know that I pick up after them. And there's the trifecta, which is a couple of people in my neighborhood who don't clean up after their dog, who smoke, throw their cigarette out in the street as they're, walking away from their dog's poop, and then start chewing gum and then spit that out. Lots of trifectas. Also, there's a lot of red lights around here that people run, and if I were with my dog, I would probably just, step in front of them to kind of show them what's what, even at the cost of, my own body. But that's neither here nor there, and that is a lot about me that has no relevance whatsoever to writing. And as with any scene on the page, we need to decide why we're putting something into the story. Once we answer that question, we have a purpose to what we're trying to tell, and that can direct us and show us what we're trying to strive for as we write this character's backstory. Has the character forgotten critical information in the past, and only by reviewing their own history can they recall that at a pivotal moment to turn the tides of the battle or stop the villain from doing whatever? I'd argue that the purpose of backstory is to flesh out a character's personality or only show them suffering, then that's likely something that would detract from the story. Even if the character was captured and tormented by the villain years before the story takes place, we can usually infer this from how those characters behave when together. In this specific example, I've seen backstory used to show the villain is evil prior to their final confrontation. The story in its present didn't build up the climax enough or even show the antagonist and protagonist together until the end of the story, sort of what we see in their backstory. Thus, the character's backstory is a band-aid to build in suspense and drama and give a reason for the characters to act. Let's see the. Oh, absolutely. There was definitely somebody who was smoking a cigarette who I regularly clean up after, and I shouted "You're welcome" at him as I ran by him. So yes, I do make many enemies in my own neighborhood. Um, yeah, I mean, I see them out. I don't know exactly. Well, there's one house that lets their dog poop on their lawn, and when it gets in the when their dog poops on the sidewalk because they let their dog off without a leash, I do, usually pick it up. I used to actually just pick it up and put it on the front doorstep. Like I would pick it up in a doggy bag and put it on the front doorstep. But I kind of stopped doing that. Yes, I am quite there. Anyways, sorry. The comments were getting interesting. I wanted to share them. But like I said, the story in its present didn't do anything to build up that suspense. And so the only reason that there was suspense and drama to begin with, or even a point to the story, is because of the trauma that was shown in the character's backstory. Instead, we could have the protagonist face off against the antagonist. And then the protagonist loses and slinks away. And then they have to recall how the antagonist created roadblocks for their younger self and caused them to lose their job and then be imprisoned. Movies often show this as a movie montage to justify the hero mowing through grunts on their way to rid the land of this evil ruler. And it's shown in very quick flashes. Obviously, we can't do that with a book because it takes a lot to set a scene where we can just get a single second long image on the screen. And that is much more difficult to do in a book. But having that moment, having a confrontation, the hero loses, and then they think of all the times they lost in the past. Well, that will give more meaning to the flashback and a reason for including it. Not only did I lose now, but I lost every single time before that. Don't encourage it, please. Yes. Passive aggressive, Ben. Yes, I'm quite passive aggressive. Um, I mean, whether I'm encouraged or not, I will still be here. Also, hey Margaret, thanks for joining in. Cool. Well, I hit the wrong button in trying to go back, and looks like I lost my screen for a few minutes, for a few seconds, but we're fine and we're back. And here we go. Number 3, plant seeds, drop hints. Backstory can take many forms, and we don't need to tell every moment if we're told. We don't need to tell this one giant moment if we're shown pieces at a time. And have faith in readers and respect their intelligence. My favorite Brandon Fraser movie is The Mummy, and it becomes much darker when we realize and we read between the lines about certain backstories from the characters. Now, there's a character named Jonathan who is the love interest's goofy brother, and he spends most of the entire movie and the entire, the sequel acting like a coward, except that he's also shown to be an amazing shot and decent in a fight. Now, based off the subtext and some of the very small moments that he talks about, there's some context clues and the timeline of the movie. Well, we can assume that he fought in the Great War and that he's suffering from PTSD. So not only, he would have been in probably he came from a rich family, so he would have been at probably a nice private school, got sent off to the Great War, World War One, and then he most likely watched his friends die. There's enough subtle details within the stories he shares that we can draw our own conclusions. Those backstory seeds get planted without showing us a flashback where he is holding some friend's hand as the friend is, dismembered and dying. These backstories that get subtly revealed hint at Jonathan's character, but don't take anything away from the story if we miss this. There's no real, like I said, he's the goofy sidekick. He's played for comedy. But if you read into his character, then the mummy sort of gets elevated in terms of this. It's more than just an adventure story that's being told to us. Oh, yeah. Thanks, Felicia, for joining in. And yes, in Megamind, the antagonist had more backstory than protagonist. Yep. That protagonist was basically Superman. He was the best at everything. And then Megamind is the one who was, abused and had to use his mind for his own evil deeds. Yep. Occasionally break the rule and tell, don't show. Yeah, yeah. You can have them just sitting around at a bar drinking and say one line, and that is all we need to know about their story. Perfect, perfect, perfect. John Hannah. I don't know. I can get IMDb up really quickly, but so he doesn't actually talk about World War One. He talks about fighting, and I think he talks about in a war. But based on the timeline of the movie, it would take place just after World War One, and so he would have been, he would have been a student. Based on his age, he would have been a student before the war, and then gone off to, and then gone off to war, and now he's kind of suffering the repercussions from. So it is a lot of inference based on the details that are shown. Again, I haven't watched The Mummy in a long time, but he does kind of hint at a tragic backstory. Yeah, they're working on making prequels to the Hunger Games, which I don't. I mean, I'm sure at this point there probably are books about it, but that wasn't the original intention. And basically, the best case that the prequels to the Hunger Games can do is show a losing war. I mean, there's no way that we should be attached to any of the characters because we know that even if they survive the Hunger Games prequel, they're basically just going to suffer through the Hunger Games and essentially die. So, yeah. Sure, you could absolutely use backstory as a diversion, but at the same time, you want to have a reason to give that backstory. So if it's a diversion, maybe it could be the first time they saw the villain, or I'm sorry, I'm not thinking of something good on the spot, but my point is to not have backstory just to throw off the reader, or even better. So you could throw it in backstory to give to highlight something that will be a red herring. So maybe if it's a murder mystery, the person might have been poisoned, but I don't know. There's also a gun, or sorry, they might have been shot to make it look like they were, killed by somebody who has a gun when in fact they were poisoned beforehand. And so you could have somebody, I don't know where I'm going with this, but you could have somebody show a backstory about how they know all this stuff about poison to then apply to the story, even though that's kind of a red herring. I hope that helps. Now, number 4, the Goldilocks rule. Just like when describing settings or a character's physical traits, there is a right amount to include. We want to be not too hot or too cold, but just the right amount. I don't have a good definition of what that exact habitable zone of storytelling is, but I do have a good applicable running metaphor. So it's been a while since I've been able to throw these in here. And it starts with me happily running through 3 digits worth of temperatures. Mind you, that's in Fahrenheit. So I'll pile on clothes when it hits 0 degrees or worse, and be running a little more than short shorts when it's above 100. Now, for all of that entire range of too hot and too cold, there's only a very small amount, maybe like 5 degrees, where I can run for an hour and still be comfortable wearing only a t-shirt and shorts. Unless it's basically when it's 40 degrees or above, if I'm outside for an hour, I'm guaranteed to be shirtless by at least the halfway point. If it's, hotter than that, chances are good that after the first mile, I am running without a shirt on. And that's just what I'm comfortable with. And yeah, that's, yeah, whatever. In writing terms, if you are writing a short story, maybe think twice about devoting a full page to giving a character's backstory. Try to reveal it in a single phrase or maybe quick banner between characters. With a full novel, the length that we can devote to backstory may include an entire chapter showing the past. I want to emphasize that I said may in there. Just because we have the space to tell something in a character's backstory doesn't mean that we as writers should. I'll refer to you back to the second tip in this video about the whole why. Why are we including that backstory? Even with 100,000 words to spare within a novel, it could easily make sense to give a character's backstory in a short clip of, I fought with your father in the Clone Wars. For that one, I think Star Wars would have been more interesting without whiny crybaby teen Vader. But that's just my 2 cents. Just like with Wolverine, characters can be better with less. If Wolverine were born in the 1800s and his mutant ability allowed him to fight in every American war because he kept his healing factor, kept him alive, okay, that's a backstory. If instead he were captured by Department H, recently and had adamantium mesh to his bones in a painful process that caused him to lose his memories so he could become a spy slash unstoppable killing machine, that's still a backstory. Sure. It's unusual, but par for the course within the Marvel world. If Wolverine had false memories implanted or was the latest in a long line of a parallel evolution based around wolves instead of monkeys, again, I can wave that off as comics being comics. To have all of this and more in one character's backstory, well, it goes to show that maybe long running stories as a medium, they should eventually end at some point, preferably before the 50-year mark when they start jumping sharks on a regular basis. The best advice I can give is the best advice I can give on knowing the balance between too much and too little information is to keep readers wanting more. We wanted to know more about Wolverine until they gave us what they gave us. And going back to Wolverine, who had modern ninja training, well, given he was alive in the 1800s, we can assume they spent time traveling the world and wound up in Japan at some point. So there are our own headcanons that exist for how he was trained to be a ninja, to fight like a ninja. Showing us those moments means that they might not live up to our reader expectations, and they could be better left to those imaginations. There's a couple of other examples where we really didn't need to know where I guess hmm, well, I can throw stones, spill tea, whatever. So with Game of Thrones, there was a season ending spoiler where it looked like a character died. And so in the year between that when that season finale ended and the next one began, there were all kinds of theories and everybody basically knew exactly how he was going to do it. So that first of all, when the moment came around, it was much less interesting than a lot of us had imagined it. And second of all, it felt a lot less special because everybody already knew exactly how it was going to play out. So the show, at that point, the show really just became formulaic of this is what the fans think, this is what the fans want. Therefore, we will just deliver them A to B to C to D. And it felt like at that point, that was one of the major turning points for the entire season going on the decline. There were some positive moments in that season, but that was definitely an absolute point of Game of Thrones was never really the same after that. Let's see. Exactly. Well, that's for different reasons, probably, Margaret. But yeah, yeah. Sure. No more comments. No, Wolverine wasn't Robert Downey Jr. That was oh god, the guy not Inception, the guy from Hugh Jackman. Thank you. Thank you. It starts with an I. I can't remember. It was the one about the magicians. Yes, the one that can sing and dance. I never actually saw it, but the greatest performer, I think it was. Anyways, there was the the magicians where he was playing against Batman. And I can't remember it. I swear it starts with an I. It's not Inception, but I really enjoyed that movie. Now, my last point, tip number 5, give us a 180. When the characters are at their lowest, the past is a perfect moment to teach us a lesson. And look no further than DC's League of Super Pets. This was a great palate cleanser and one of the only DC movies I enjoyed in the past 5 years. And yes, thank you. That was The Prestige. It had nothing to do with an I. I don't know what I was thinking of, but yes, thank you, Adriana, my lovely wife, for telling me what I was thinking. Yeah, that is a Marvel problem with Iron Man. Every movie seemed to give a different backstory. Well, they were just kind of expanding on it because, yep. Well, we don't need to go into that. The first Iron Man movie was a classic. Great. I can clearly see how that started the entire Marvel universe. The second one was passable, even though he made up an element based on the plans of his father, or based on a map of what is essentially Disney World. And then the third one was made. So, all right. Now back to superheroes and super pets. League of Super Pets. It's a fun anime movie. Strongly encourage you to watch it. It's great. Now there's a moment where you see the truth about a reckless dog who came from a shelter. He seems like a bad dog who is only looking out for himself and maybe the other pets who are in the shelter with him. Then it's revealed that he has a tragic past, and I won't go into it, but it hits hard. I mean, it hits really hard, especially because I can sympathize with the situation that that dog was in. If that makes any sense, because they had a difficult choice to make and they made it without thinking of the consequences, or rather, they made it knowing what the consequences could be. Worse, even knowing what happens after and the direct results that caused him to be forced into adoption or be sent to a shelter, this dog to be sent to an animal shelter. He knows he made the right call, and that is why he willingly suffers for the fallout. The backstory made me rethink every moment with that character, and it gave him a lot more depth than I expected from what had otherwise been a very light and fun, loosely comic book based movie. So, those are my 5 tips to writing backstory. And when all else fails, again, make us feel feelings, because that 180 turn was, to put it bluntly, yeah, literal tears. My wife is definitely a lot more sympathetic towards dog suffering. And so watching a dog in a happy home end up in a shelter definitely breaks her heart. I was going to say, I don't think either of us have seen Isle of Dogs. Hmm. Well, anyways, so those are my 5 tips about writing backstory into our stories. I am Ben Pick, and thank you for joining me in another episode of Running to Write. Let me know in those comments how you put into how you put the back and backstory into your novels. And I post my running and writing progress on Instagram and Twitter as Running to Write, or X Twitter, I guess, as Running to Write. So be sure to follow me and join with your own thoughts and comments. And if you like running shoes, I've been posting a lot more of those. There's some fun pictures of both my wife's new shoes and mine, and we sort of critique them and talk about how they feel, or I do. I really like the Asics Cumulus, the Asics Brooks Cumulus. Either way, the shoe is called Cumulus. It's really good. It's very mid balanced. Um, and I'm just drawing this out. Anyways, don't forget to sign up for the Rain to Write monthly newsletter if you want regular updates on my sort of musings, pitfalls, and lessons learned. I just sent one out last week, so you got plenty of time to sign up before next month's. And you'll get to hear all about how Spooktober went for me and how I may or may not be prepping for NaNoWriMo. Spoiler alert, I won't be prepping for NaNoWriMo, but I do have a lot of other things that I'm sort of trying to pick up on. And right. Oh, my monthly newsletter comes out on the 3rd of every month. So see you next time. Until then, consider cutting out a character's backstory or showing us the results through their actions and dialogue. And let's see here. Yep. Down with NaNoWriMo. More shoe picks. Will do. I get new shoes every 3 months, although since I've been incorporating biking instead of running to spare my knees, my shoes can usually last for maybe 4 months. And yeah, this month we'll try and do a lot more spooky content so we can see how everything's going. With that, I will see you all next week. If I can hit the right end stream button. There we go.